Speaker.
I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, New Zealand First supported this bill at the first reading to go to the Select Committee because it seemed like us to be a pretty common sense sort of a bill, so that Parliamentary Under-Secretaries should be subject to Official Information Act requests for information in the same way that ministers are. And at that time, of course, David Seymour opposed the bill, and we in New Zealand First were pretty comforted by that because, of course, he always gets things wrong, so by supporting it, we thought we must be getting it right. He said the bill was, quote, inconsequential in every practical sense, unquote, given that his decisions as Under-Secretary for Education, responsible for charter schools, and Under-Secretary for Regulatory Reform would be copied to the Minister. And so an OIA would better discover those decisions direct from the Minister and not from him. That was his reasoning. But strangely, he also said that the Official Information Act was there to, quote, keep tabs on what the executive was doing, unquote, and that this bill means that, quote, we've now abandoned that principle, unquote, apparently because he does not see that a Parliamentary Under-Secretary is part of executive government. Well, hello, if he doesn't understand that he has joined the government in an executive position, then there can be little hope that he will actually do anything useful in that position either.
Never really hoped to start with.
And therefore, there could be no useful official information he would possess which could then be obtainable under the Official Information Act.
Well said.
He also said, quote, all the bill does is attempt to attack me, and while I'm a little bit flattered, I cannot support the bill, unquote. In fact, he has been more flat-ended by the bill than flattered by it, because he also said that the bill was, quote, silly. Yet he now announces that he will support this, quote, silly bill. So what does that make him? The answer, I think, is self-evident by self-definition. But this has led to a rethink by New Zealand First, because if Mr Seymour now supports the bill, we are worried by our initial support for it. And after thinking it through, we can no longer support the bill, and we now feel strongly that we must oppose it. And Mr Speaker, there are two good reasons for that. And the first one is that the bill is actually completely unnecessary. And the appointment of a wet behind the ears first-term MP as a Parliamentary Under-Secretary actually shows that. He's not even well named as Mr Seymour for the position when he clearly sees less than most as far as his responsibilities are concerned. So what possible use could he be in regulatory reform, which he clearly has got no actual experience of whatsoever? And what possible use could he be supervising the obviously failed charter school program? And therefore, what possible useful information could be obtainable from him on any of these areas, which can't be got from actually reliable sources? In fact, Mr Speaker, I am unreliably informed that an OIA request already made of him for all information in his diary concerning his duties performed so far was returned with this result. Yes, it is a blank sheet of paper, and that's about as useful as information from Mr Seymour could ever be. Secondly, Mr Speaker, there would be many other problems in getting useful information from Mr Seymour, because even if he did have any useful information, which we doubt, it's very unlikely that such an inexperienced Parliamentary Under-Secretary would understand it enough to make any worthwhile comment on it. And then there's the question of how long getting the information would take. Possibly as long as it would take to get the Parliamentary Library to get the answer for him, because he wouldn't know what the answer would be. That, of course, actually makes him redundant, and it would clearly be much better to go to a reliable source to get the information one might want on the subjects which Mr Seymour is the Parliamentary Secretary in respect of. In fact, Mr Speaker, the only thing I can see that Mr Seymour and ACT have achieved so far is actually the disappearance of the last red telephone boxes in New Zealand's streets. Many think that that was because of increased mobile telephone use, but the truth is that the primary use of telephone boxes was to provide accommodation for ACT party meetings. But with ACT parliamentary representation now provided by Mr Seymour, even that requirement has now dwindled to zero. Now, finally, Mr Speaker, what the bill does do is to redefine the term, quote, Minister of the Crown, unquote, to include parliamentary secretaries. We in New Zealand First can't actually bear the thought of David Seymour as a genuine Minister of the Crown. Clearly, the crowd he once met with in telephone boxes around the country don't think so either, because they don't do that anymore. So, Mr Speaker, for that reason, amongst all the others, New Zealand First can no longer vote for a bill doomed by what it cannot possibly achieve, obtaining useful official information from Under-Secretary Seymour.
I'm sure the member couldn't have been more eloquent if he had read his speech. Brett Hudson.